They say the third time's the charm, and Japan in 1982 proves it. The third chapter of the Japanese 1980s once again delivers it all. Pop culture milestones, moments of tragedy, drama, sports drama, a world record-breaking TV show, the birth of a rivalry between idols, the debut of a shiny new coin, the debut of an even shinier little disc that would go on to change the world forever, and UFOs? Sounds like we got quite a bit to unpack this year, huh? My name is Aniki, this is Timeline Japan, and the year is 1982. Like, subscribe, Patreon. Who am I kidding? You know the drill by now, so let's just get this thing started already. Ikimashou. Let's do this. What better way to kick off the year than with some good old cardio? On January 24th, Japan's second largest city hosted the very first edition of the Osaka Women's Marathon. Beginning at Nagai Stadium, runners from around the world were taken on a 41.2-kilometer tour through Osaka, passing some of the city's most important spots, like Nakanoshima, Midōsuchi, and of course, the legendary Osaka Castle, before circling back to the stadium where it all started. The inaugural champion, Italian runner Rita Marchisio, who crossed the finish line in an impressive 2 hours, 32 minutes, and 55 seconds. Since then, the marathon has been held every single year, except for 1995, when a great Hanshin earthquake shook Osaka and its surrounding regions. And today, the Osaka Women's Marathon lives on as a mainstay on the international marathon calendar, one of Japan's overall most important annual sporting events, and perhaps the most time-efficient way to sightsee Osaka, provided you've got the lungs for it, that is. February, on the other hand, came with back-to-back tragedies. On the 8th, a massive fire broke out at the Hotel New Japan in Akasaka, Tokyo, believed to have been started when one of the guests' cigarettes ignited a blanket at roughly 3:24 AM. Hotel staff tried in vain to put it out, failing multiple times before finally someone called in the fire department around 20 minutes after the fire had already started. And by the time the firefighters arrived, the entire 9th floor of the building was engulfed in flames, trapping hundreds of guests inside. It took until 12:36 until the fire had been completely extinguished. And by then, the damage had already been done. Hotel Japan was severely damaged in the fire, but much worse were the significant human casualties. 34 injured and 33 dead. A horrific disaster, made worse by just how avoidable it was. Investigators discovered that the hotel's safety measures were practically non-existent. The alarm system didn't work. Sprinklers either broken or missing. Hotel staff clueless on how to deal with the situation. The reason for all this was, of course, corporate greed. Owner and businessman Yokoi Hideki had slashed expenses during construction, maintenance, and training of hotel staff, significantly exacerbating a catastrophe that could have and should have been avoided. Yokoi was subsequently sentenced to 3 years in prison, and Hotel Japan was demolished in 1996, 14 years after the fire. Then, the very next day, tragedy struck again in Tokyo. On February the 9th, at 8:44 AM, Japan Airlines Flight 350, carrying 174 people, crashed into Tokyo Bay. But unlike most crashes, this one wasn't an accident. The captain, Seichi Katagiri, had battled severe depression and schizophrenia for years, and had even been suspended from duty at one point. But despite the many red flags, including concerns raised by his own wife, he was reinstated as captain in late 1981. His last job as a JAL pilot was to be a flight from Fukuoka to Tokyo, and it was just before landing in the capital that things went horribly wrong. While approaching Haneda Airport, Katagiri suddenly disengaged the autopilot, and despite desperate attempts by his co-pilot to stop him, deliberately steered the plane towards the ground and into Tokyo Bay. Rescue crews then arrived at the plane wreckage about 15 minutes later. The grim toll: 54 injuries, 95 serious injuries, and 24 deaths. Katagiri survived, was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and thus found not criminally responsible. He was, however, hospitalized and dismissed from JAL, which came under some serious fire itself for allowing Katagiri back in the cockpit despite all the clear warning signs. Thankfully, we got April to give us some brighter headlines. Because on April 1st, Japan introduced a brand new friend to wallets across the nation: the 500 yen coin. Replacing the 100 yen coin as the country's highest denomination, the 500 yen coin was introduced as a cupro-nickel alternative to its already existing 500 yen paper bill counterpart. The true purpose of the coin? Mainly to match Japan's exploding vending machine culture. You know, instead of fumbling around with a pile of coins, you could just pull out this shiny little fella. Just to put into perspective the sheer buying power of this thing, a single 500 yen coin could buy you 4 entire cans of Pocari Sweat with 20 yen left to spare. Or perhaps even better, 10 frickin' Gari Gari Kun popsicles. Hell yeah. Upon its introduction, the 500 yen coin became one of the highest value coins in everyday circulation anywhere in the world. And with its beautiful design and high usability in everyday life, it reigned supreme. By 1994, its paper bill counterpart had been completely phased out. And even today, it's still a handy must-have for Japanese locals and tourists alike who still like to pay for stuff the old-fashioned way. You know, with actual tangible currency and stuff. And if you used one of those brand new coins to buy a newspaper on April 1st, you'd have also picked up a little piece of comic history in the process. Because that very same day, the Yomiuri Shimbun debuted the 4-panel comic strip Kobo-chan, following the everyday misadventures of kindergartner Tabata Kobo, better known as Kobo-chan, and the people around him. Its creator Ueda Masashi could hardly have imagined the runaway success of his simple but heartwarming strip. As of today, Kobo-chan has published over 14,000 installments in the Yomiuri, a Japanese record, which have since been collected in more than 100 volumes and even spawned an anime adaptation that ran from 1992 to 1994. What started as a small, slice-of-life gag strip turned into a series of stories that generations of Yomiuri readers, young and old, fell in love with over the past 4+ decades. A beloved cultural touchstone of Japan, made in 1982.
男と女の心と体が入れ替わったってことを信じるか?
In July, Japan gave the world a true first. The Seiko Epson HC20, the world's very first notebook-sized portable computer. Released domestically under that name and as the HX20 overseas, this little machine was a technical marvel of its time. Roughly the size of an A4 notebook and weighing just 1.6 kilograms, or about 3.5 pounds, you could actually slip this bad boy into a briefcase or carry it around in one hand. Sounds like nothing special these days, but back in 1982, this was nearly science fiction level stuff. The eye-watering price of 138,600 yen bought you 2 Hitachi-powered CPUs running at a blistering 614 kHz each, a whole 16 kilobytes of RAM, a 120x32 pixel LCD screen, a full-size keyboard, and because why the hell not, a built-in dot matrix printer. You know, perfect for those urgent, on-the-go printing emergencies. The HC-20 was a hit in Japan, though it struggled a bit to make a dent abroad, despite rave reviews from international tech outlets. Still, as the first true notebook computer, Seiko Epson's creation was a glimpse straight into the future, and a perfect example of just how far ahead Japan was when it came to consumer tech in the early 1980s.
コマーシャルタイムです。
どうもどうも。乾杯。À votre santé. Cheers. Salud. Chin chin.
We've arrived in the summer of '82, so how about we bring a bit of music into the mix? On July 28th, Nakamori Akina dropped her second single, Shoujo A, and with it, she found her true sound. Compared to her debut a few months prior, Shoujo A was louder, sharper, edgier. It was almost a rebellion against the sugary bubblegum idol pop that dominated the era, and Japanese listeners welcomed Nakamori with open arms. The track launched her into stardom, setting her up for one of the most successful idol careers of the decade. 20 #1 singles and 12 #1 albums between 1982 and 1989 put her up there with the greatest idols to ever do it. Her biggest rival at the time, of course, none other than Matsuda Seiko, the eternal idol. Together, they traded spots at the top of the charts all throughout the 1980s, in what was perhaps one of the most iconic rivalries in J-pop history. And of course, the press tried their best to spin it into a personal feud as well, sometimes in truly ugly ways. In 1989, after Nakamori's highly publicized and tragic attempt at ending her own life, tabloids spread rumors that her then boyfriend Kondo Masahiko was secretly cheating on her with Matsuda Seiko. The story, however, collapsed at a press conference later that same year, and Nakamori's former producer even stated that she was actually a Matsuda Seiko fan herself.
歌なしでもいいですよね。こういう。これだけで。こういう。
I mean, who wasn't? But rivalry or not, the competition clearly pushed both artists to greater heights and gave us some of the best music of the 1980s idol boom. But which team are you on? Team Nakamori or Team Matsuda? Drop it in the comments, but keep it civil. Unlike what went down at Yokohama Stadium on August 31st. At the top of the 7th inning of a tied game between the Yokohama Taiyo Whales and the Hanshin Tigers, umpire Washiya Wataru called a controversial foul ball against the Tigers. Their third base coach then stormed onto the field to protest. Then the first base coach joined in, and before long, the entire Tigers squad had surrounded Washiya. Things then got physical real fast. He and two other umpires were attacked in what the press later accurately branded gang-like behavior. The two coaches leading the charge were ejected, and the game was suspended. And that should have been the end of the game, right? Wrong. 10 minutes later, officials announced the game would continue, and in the end, Hanshin walked away with a 3-1 victory, much to the fury of the Yokohama home fans. Ouch. The two coaches faced police investigation, but all they got was a measly 50,000 yen fine and a short 10-game ban, which was later lifted after a formal apology. Still, the Yokohama Stadium referee gang assault incident remains a notorious black mark in the long history of the Hanshin Tigers. But for one brand new Hokkaido newspaper, it was one heck of a story to launch with. Because the very next day, September 1st, marked the debut of Dōshin Sports, the sports-dedicated spin-off of the Hokkaido Shimbun. Tokyo, Osaka, and all the other big cities across Japan already had their fair share of sports dailies. But now, Japan's northernmost island finally had its own outlet, covering both nationwide and local sporting news. Nicknamed Dōspo, the paper quickly became a mainstay in Japanese sports journalism. Its print edition ended in 2022, but it still lives on digitally today. That referee assault just a day before its launch though, now that's certainly one hell of a cover story to launch your paper with. Similarly newsworthy was the storm that hit on September 22nd, when one of Japan's oldest department stores, Mitsukoshi, found itself in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. At the center of it all was company president Okada Shigeru, who had ruled the retailer like a dictator since 1972. He ousted anyone who questioned him, manipulated financial reports to cover up losses and tighten his grip on power, and even elevated his own mistress to a position so influential that insiders dubbed her the Empress of Mitsukoshi. But what finally brought Okada down wasn't the bullying or cooking the books. It was an art scandal. Earlier that year, Mitsukoshi's flagship store in Nihonbashi hosted an exhibition of so-called ancient Persian treasures. Many of the artifacts on display, which would have been worth hundreds of millions of yen, turned out to be completely fake, commissioned under Okada's orders. He, of course, denied everything, until the very artist who created the replicas went public, shocked that his work was being passed off as genuine without his knowledge. What followed were two explosive articles in Asahi Shimbun, and finally Mitsukoshi's board of directors moved to oust Okada. He raged, claimed the dismissal was illegal, and demanded answers, only for the company's lawyers waiting in the next room to calmly confirm that yes, it was all perfectly legal. His one-word response: why? A simple little word, hilarious enough given the situation to become somewhat of a catchphrase in Japan for the rest of the year. And to twist the knife even further, Okada's replacement as president was none other than Ichihara Akira, a man that Okada himself had once demoted. Yikes.
コマーシャルタイムです。
おいしいつくづくつくづくおいしいつくづくおいしいつくづくおいしいつくづくおいしいつくづくおいしいおいしい
ビタミン E とカルシウム入り生のり佃煮江戸紫おいしいです。
October 1st, 1982. Just one of those days that changed the world, when Japan became the very first country to get its hands on a compact disc. This was a full 6 months before it launched worldwide. And that's no coincidence, because just like Devon Aoki, the CD was a half Japanese invention. Sony and Dutch electronics giant Philips teamed up to create it, while CBS Sony Records supplied the Japanese market with its very first 50 titles on these futuristic, shiny little discs. But a shiny new format also needs a shiny new player to play it on. And so that very same day, Sony also launched the world's first commercially available CD player, the CDP-101. The price tag, a hefty 168,000 yen, or about $730 US. In 1982 money, mind you. Each CD set you back around 3,800 yen, or roughly $16, which made early adoption a pretty expensive affair. So it wasn't until the early 90s that CDs truly exploded in mainstream popularity. But when they did, they really exploded. By 2007, over 200 billion CDs had been sold worldwide, and the technology also laid the foundation for DVDs, Blu-ray, Laserdisc, even the criminally underrated mini-disc format. All that from a shiny little 12cm diameter disc that first hit shelves in Japan in 1982. Just 3 days later, Japanese television witnessed the debut of one of its longest-running shows ever. Broadcast live every weekday at 12 PM from Studio Alta in Shinjuku, Tokyo, Warate Itomo ended up running for over 31 years with more than 8,000 episodes to its name. Hosted by comedian Morita Kazuyoshi aka Tamori, the program followed a very simple concept. If it's not fun, it's not lunchtime. A playful spin on Fuji TV's own catchphrase, if it's not fun, it's not television. Warate Itomo was a variety show through and through, with a regular cast, audience interaction, and celebrity guests who took part in talk segments, call-in segments, games, and much more. It had a very set structure. Viewers knew exactly what to expect and when to expect it. But its goofy, rotating lineup of variety segments kept things just unpredictable enough to stay fresh. A mix of comfort and surprise that turned it into a lunchtime ritual for generations of Japanese viewers. So when the show finally signed off on March 31st, 2014, it marked the end of an era. Not bad for something that host Tamori himself thought would be cancelled after just a few months. Instead, it not only made him a Japanese entertainment legend, but also landed him a Guinness World Record. Most live broadcasts of a variety show by the same host. Yet another lunchtime legend arrived in November, though this one was actually edible and pretty damn delicious. That month in Yokohama, the very first branch of the Sukiya beef bowl chain of restaurants opened its doors. Founder Ogawa Kentaro had previously worked at rival beef bowl chain Yoshinoya, but decided to strike out on his own with a different approach. Sukiya didn't just target busy train stations, it placed restaurants along major roads and in suburban areas, making beef bowls, or gyudon as the Japanese like to call it, accessible to families and car travelers too. It also offered both counter seating and tables, so whether you were a solo salaryman or a family of 4, you had a place here, and the name Sukiya itself reflected the vibe. Welcoming, casual, with no beef to be found except the one inside your bowl. Over the years, the menu expanded to include curry, desserts, and more, but gyudon remained the star of the show. And today, Sukiya is Japan's largest quick-service restaurant chain with over 2,600 branches worldwide, most of them in Japan. Damn, I could go for a beef bowl right now. Later that same month came a big change at the top. On November 27th, Nakasone Yasuhiro was sworn in as Japanese Prime Minister, beginning nearly 5 years in office, the longest tenure of a Japanese Prime Minister of the 1980s. Nakasone is remembered internationally for his incredibly close relationship with Ronald Reagan, famously dubbed the Ron-Yasu relationship, a relationship that Nakasone himself once compared to baseball, saying he was the catcher and Reagan the pitcher. Though I'm not sure that metaphor entirely holds up. But beyond that, Nakasone was a champion of privatization, overseeing reforms that reshaped state-owned giants like Japan National Railways, Nippon Telegraph, and Japan Tobacco. But his tenure wasn't without controversy either, especially when it came to his nationalist leanings and actions. Like, how about that one time in 1985 when he paid a visit to Yasukuni Shrine, a place where several war criminals can be found buried in complete mourning dress? That understandably raised a few eyebrows, especially in countries like China. Still, in many ways, Nakasone personified 1980s Japan. Booming, assertive, eager to be recognized on the world stage, but also sometimes walking a fine line between pride and provocation. Finally, 1982 ended with, well, something out of this world. Maybe? On December 15th, Nippon Terebi aired a special revisiting the Kofu UFO incident, one of Japan's most famous extraterrestrial mysteries. The original event took place back in 1975, when 2 second graders reported seeing a glowing orange UFO land near a cemetery. They claimed that a chocolate-colored, wrinkled alien emerged and tried to approach them, causing the boys to make a run for it, and their parents later reported strange lights in the sky. And investigators found collapsed posts, holes in the ground, and odd tracks in a nearby vineyard where the orange object had supposedly landed. The case briefly made headlines before fading, Until 7 years later, when a woman claimed to have spotted the same alien figure in that same spot, sparking fresh media interest. And later that same year, Nippon Terebi's special put the story back in the spotlight, fueling nationwide debates. Were the boys telling the truth, or was it all just an elaborate hoax? We may never know, but there are so many unanswered questions. Like when you say chocolate colored, are we talking milk chocolate? Dark chocolate, 80%, 90%? I need answers. But hey, that's all I got for 1982. And not to leak spoilers here or anything, but I heard that 1983 comes after 1982, and that a video about it is releasing very soon. Well, until that happens, I'll wrap this thing up by giving my Patreon supporters their time to shine. All of you, including the hockey gentleman, Khalid Labda, Xo Yabu, Javier Soravia, Steve Matsui, Turam, RK0, Todd, James Wang Wian Kam, Utku Hussein Kaya, Sierra DC, White Gilden, Justin Down, Yoko the Space Whale, Cats and Soup, Chart B-Man, Ben Harradine, Metal Mama, T-Bird, Tom Ericus Prime, and Boo Boo Cakes. And to everyone else who chose to tune in this time, I guess I'll see you next year. じゃあ、まったね。